Hello, thank you for joining me today. This is another how many times I've worn my eyeshadow palettes video. I do this I try to do it every year. Sometimes I do it every 2 years. And essentially I just take all of my eyeshadow palettes and I calculate how many times I've worn them since my last update, and I put them in order of least used palette all the way up to my most used. And in these videos, I list out all of my eyeshadow palettes at the beginning of the video and ask you to guess which one you think is going to be my most used and my least used eyeshadow palette. A lot of people get the answers right or are very close, and I'm always pleasantly surprised by that. I must be very transparent in my videos about what I like and what I don't wear as much. And yeah, it's just a fun exercise. And something I've noticed over the years is often the projects that I do in other videos determine how much I wear my palettes. For example, a couple months ago I put out a video sharing a secret. I had been secretly panning a set of single eyeshadows for almost a year. And because I was focusing on those singles so much in order to finish them or hit pan on them, I didn't wear my eyeshadow palettes as much. And I was worried that that would happen because I tend to really focus on the products I'm trying to finish. And so I did incorporate behind the scenes a no pan left behind project where I tried to reach for every eyeshadow in my palettes at least once. So I am happy to report that even though I was working so hard on those singles, I still have at least a couple uses on all of my palettes since last year. My last update was at the end of December of 2024, so it's been almost a year, about 11 and a half months since my last update. And I do have one eyeshadow palette that I've been tracking since the very beginning, which I think my first update was in May of 2020. So I have a lot of cool numbers to share. And I'm gonna start, like I said, with my least used palette all the way up to my most used. And my least used palette is actually my newest palette. I got this Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette for Christmas last December from my brother and sister-in-law, which was so kind of them. I love this palette. It's beautiful. I had worn it 0 times in my last update because I had only just gotten it a few days ago for Christmas. And since then I've only worn it 12 times. It's not because I don't like this palette, it's just I wanted to make sure I was reaching for my other palettes more because they are older, and I kind of need to break out of that mindset of if it's brand new, maybe I just save it until I work on some of my older stuff because then the newer stuff gets neglected too. This is a really beautiful palette. I have another Natasha Denona palette that I'll talk about later, and I'm always really happy with the formulas. I like the different types of shimmers. I like the colors of the mattes. This color here, Mesh, is like my perfect crease shade. It's the perfect neutral, slightly cool mid-tone shade to put in my crease. So yeah, really great palette. Not really much to say about that. I think it looks like it's been barely touched, maybe except for that center shade. That is what 12 uses looks like on this palette. The next one is my second newest palette. I got this in May of 2024, and that is the Lethal Cosmetics Avatar: The Last Airbender Earth palette. And I would say if I were to choose what group I was in The Last Airbender, I would probably be part of the Water Tribe, but I didn't love the colors in the Water Tribe palette. I liked the Earth ones more. I mean, I like a blue eyeshadow, but this also happens with Zodiac palettes too. I'm a Pisces, and I find that a lot of the Pisces palettes that people create are so blue, and that's just not really my favorite eyeshadow color to wear unless it's a really light blue or like a frosty blue. Yeah, so it's just the life of a Pisces, I guess, but I like this color story a lot. It's just very pigmented. My camera's on the fritz and it keeps shutting off while I'm filming, so I don't exactly remember where I left off, but I was saying that these shades are very saturated and it's hard to do like a soft eyeshadow look with this unless I'm just reaching for maybe the center shade because it looks really green in the pan, but it's kind of got a slightly more translucent base, and then it has like pink and green shift to it, which is stunning. There's no excuse. It's a great palette. And in my last update, I had only worn it 12 times. It was relatively new to me at that point, and at this point I've worn it 16 times. So I've worn it 4 more times since my last update, and that is what 16 uses looks like on the palette. And I think I have a video, maybe a couple videos of me creating looks with this. I think maybe one of my vlogs. So if I can find that, I will link it in the cards if you're curious to see what looks I created with this. The next one is this What's Up Beauty Dragon palette. I love this palette. I love all three of the What's Up palettes that I have. And this one is so beautiful. It has a lot of really beautiful, unique multi-chromes in there. Every time I wear it, I'm always so excited about the results. I wore recently a combination of Monster and Magic on my lids for a concert recently, and it was a really beautiful look. I got this in November of 2023. So I've had it just around 2 years now. In my last update, I had only reached for it 13 times, and now I'm up to 19 uses. So I've worn it 6 more times in the last year. I hope the mirror bouncing off the ring light isn't blinding you completely, and I hope you can still see the shades. But this is what 19 uses looks like on this palette. Yeah, beautiful. I think you can even take these pans out individually if you wanted to just take a couple with you, or mix around the shades to create like maybe quads or something to your liking, which I like that. I like when palettes have that level of customization. The Natasha Denona palettes are like that too. Speaking of, my next least used palette is from Natasha Denona. It's the Retro Glam palette. I think I used my Ulta points on this a long time ago, back in December of 2023. So just around 2 years ago. I like green eyeshadows, and it was kind of between this or the Yucca palette. And I have some green palettes already, including the Juicy Olive palette, and so I figured the Retro Glam would be a better addition to my eyeshadow collection because the greens are a little softer, more like sage, eucalyptus shades, cooler, and just didn't seem to be as saturated as some of the other olive greens that I have in my collection, and I just felt like the Yucca palette pulled really warm, and that wasn't really what I was going for at the time, and it still isn't. So I am glad that I purchased this. I love pinks and greens together. I have done a tutorial where I used this palette to create a peaches and green eyeshadow look. Actually, I don't think there was any peach in my eyeshadow. I think I had like a peachier lip and a green eye look, and I think it turned out really nicely. I really loved that look, and I wore it multiple times. In my last update, I had worn this 15 times. I have since worn it an additional 6 times for a total of 21 uses. And that is what 21 wears looks like on this palette in particular. Really nice palette. I like that it's a little more subtle. When I look at eyeshadow palettes that catch my eye nowadays, they do have a slightly softer, less saturated color story, and maybe they're a little bit more neutral or cool toned. This next palette is cool toned. I wouldn't say it's soft or subtle by any means, but it is really beautiful. It's from Vive, and it's the 90s palette. These eyeshadows are ginormous, and I did do a full face of Vive video quite a while ago where I featured a look and a tutorial of how I chose shades to create a look with this palette. And I got this in October of 2023, and in my last update I had worn it 23 times. Again, I've worn it an additional 6 times to reach 29 uses. This is not a palette I would ever like try to pan or finish. The majority of the palettes I have I wouldn't try to finish all the way through, but even just trying to hit pan on one of these shades I think would be a massive, massive undertaking. These eyeshadows are enormous. Beautiful color story, a great companion palette if I wanted to create like a cool toned or ashy, smoky eye look, and then put maybe something a little bit more interesting and sparkly on the lid, or just doing an all matte look with this palette always turns out really beautifully. So yeah, I'm really glad I have this. And this is kind of the reason why I've held off from buying the Glam palette from Natasha Denona, just because I already have a cool toned eyeshadow palette that I really like. I don't know if I need to. Still on my radar, it's just not as urgent. Because I have this. Next up is another eyeshadow palette from What's Up Beauty. It's the Geode. This is, I think, the first palette that I ever received from the brand, and I got this in February of 2023, so just around 2.5 years. In September of 2023, I had reached for it 8 times. Last December, I had bumped that up to 21 uses, and now I've worn it an additional 8 times for a total of 29 wears, and that's what 29 uses looks like on this palette. I love this green here, Peridot. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Yeah, and then this matte here, Clay, is like an olive brown, like a khaki brown. Beautiful. I love this palette. I would say maybe out of the 3 What's Up palettes I have, this is number 3, but like it's not far behind. Next up is Shroud Arcana. I got this back in July of 2021. So it is one of my older palettes. I have 4 updates. So back in August of 2022, I had worn it 3 times. A year later, I had bumped that up to 31 uses. Last December, I bumped that up to 44 uses. And now I'm at exactly 50 uses. And these are very deep pigmented shades. So I'm using a very little amount of it each time I'm applying them. So even though I've worn this 50 times, I don't think there's any one specific shade that I've been focusing on. I do think it's like a relatively even amount of use across the palette. I love it, but it is getting up there in age, and I think I'm just gonna have to go out of my way to wear it more so that when I do eventually need to declutter it, it won't feel as bad, like I won't regret it as much. I wanted this palette for the longest time. I even did a video where I tried to dupe it within my current eyeshadow collection to justify not purchasing it, and then I ended up purchasing it anyway because I really wanted it. And yeah, I love these jewel tones. They're so special and beautiful and unique in my collection, but you know, it's getting up there in age. I'm gonna have to figure that out because I do have quite a few eyeshadow palettes that I really love that are unfortunately getting up there in age. Next up is this palette that I created myself from Lethal Cosmetics. It is 99% shimmer shades and then 1 matte shade. I did a video where I outlined and described and swatched all of these shades. So if you're more curious about each individual one, I do have a palette for that, a video for that, I mean. And I got this back in March of 2022, so around 3.5 years old. And this was an expensive palette because you pay per single instead of all on its own. I think I spent like $90 on this palette if I remember correctly. But these are so beautiful and special. I have a pan on this top shade here, Ceres, which is a multi-chrome. I use this on the inner corner. And then on this one here, I think this is, it's either Renegade or Retrograde. I'm pretty sure it's Retrograde. Beautiful eyeshadow that pulls green on me. In 2022, I'd worn it 13 times. The next year, I wore it 38 times. So an additional, 25 times? Bumped that up to 51 times last December, and now I'm up to 57 uses. And I mean, I have reached for all of the shades since then because it was part of my No Pan Left Behind, but I definitely was focusing on specific shades, especially the 2 that I already had pan on. So that is what 57 uses looks like on this palette. And then the next one is my third of the What's Up palettes. It's the Desert Monsoon. This is my most used palette, I would say, because I bring this a lot with me when I travel. It's a great travel palette because it has some nice, more like everyday or neutral shades if I just want something really easy, but then there are a few like pops of color. And these palettes are also really compact and easy to travel with. They feel really sturdy, like they're not gonna break while I have them in my travel bag. And yeah, on my last trip, I took the Dragon palette and this, and it was just perfect and so compact. I got this in April of 2023. So in that year, I wore it 28 times, bumped that up to 46 times the next year. And most recently, I am now at 57 uses. So that's what 57 uses looks on this palette. I don't know if I'm really close to hitting pan on anything, but it really is one of those palettes where I reach for most of the shades pretty evenly. This shade here, Desert Rose, it's like a pink gold duochrome. It's really beautiful. Next up is my oldest palette, and that's the Juicy Olive palette from Give Me Glow. I got this in December of 2019, so it's getting up there. And I have been trying to make a more concerted effort to reach for this more. I don't imagine I'll hit pan on any of the shades before I get to the point that I want to declutter it. In 2020, I had reached for it 4 times. When I did an update 2 years later, I had bumped that up to 22 times, and then 35 times in 2023. Last year, I was already up to 48 times, and now I'm up to 61 uses. And I would say that is a fairly even amount of use across all of the shades. I don't think there's one specific shade that I reached for the most. Maybe I reach for this one shade to deepen up the outer corner the most often, like every time I'm reaching for it. And that's actually what I did today. I'm wearing a couple shades from this palette on my eyes. And yeah, I am trying to reach for this more, along with the other like second oldest eyeshadow palette in my collection. I don't think I'm going to turn it into a video series or anything, but essentially what I'm trying to do is reach for this, get to 100 uses. And if I'm ready to pass it on at that point, then I will have known that I've at least enjoyed it 100 times. If I'm not ready to part with it yet, then I'll add another 50 uses and I'll try to reach for it a total of 150 times. And maybe just from using it more and like allowing myself the time to really evaluate it will like give me the peace of mind to eventually like retire this palette. I don't know, I think that's just for me. I think that's me kind of just like coping with the fact that I've had this for a long time and I haven't reached for it as much as I would have liked to, even though I do really like these colors. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. And yeah, I'm up to 61 uses now on this palette. Just 6 palettes left. This is Huda Beauty Rose Quartz. Out of all of the palettes I have, I would say that this is my favorite color story. I would even maybe go as far to say as it's my favorite palette. And I got this in January of 2022. In the first year of having this palette, I wore it 43 times because I was just really loving it. I do have a 3 looks 1 palette video with this palette. And the next year, I didn't reach for it as much. I only went up to 49 wears. The year after that, I bumped it up to 61 wears, and I am now to 69 wears. And I do have a couple pans in here and a couple shades that I'm really close to hitting pan. Currently, as of now, my mindset is, even if I get to a point where it's old and I want to declutter it, like I'm gonna try to enjoy it as much as I can now, but if it gets to that point where it's not performing the same and I'm ready to retire it, I likely would repurchase it. Hopefully it will still be available. I think it's still available on the Huda Beauty website, but it is one of those palettes that I would just really like to have. It's got a really beautiful color story. I love the shimmers in here. I love the purpley cool mauve mattes. This Cosmic Love Here shade is stunning. I really like this palette, and I'm always surprised that I've only worn it 69 times. In my head, it would be one of my most used palettes. It's just so special and unique. I'm so happy every time I open it up. The next one is Unexpected, that it would be my 5th most used palette in my collection, and that's the It's Freakin' Bats palette from Shroud Cosmetics. And I did used to have a really dark purple shade down there, but that, after I hit pan on it, it ended up breaking. So I just put another shade there in its place. This again is a very colorful, saturated eyeshadow color story. And so it's not like an everyday palette for me in particular. And I think the majority of the uses for this palette were because that one shade from the palette was in a Pan Those Eyeshadows project. And so it was that really dark purple shade that you don't see here. I do have a short, I think, where I showed the progression of me eventually hitting pan on that palette. So I'll link that in the cards if I can find it. So this is what 71 uses looks like. I started in 2022 with 5 uses and then bumped it up to 53 uses the next year, likely because it was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project. Bumped it up again to 67 uses the next year, and now I've worn it an additional 4 times for 71. And you're not getting like the full 71 use look because that bottom shade, like I said, is gone. And again, I got this in March of 2021, so it's one of my older palettes, and I'm just gonna try to reach for this more over the next year or so, just to make sure that once I am ready to retire it, I'll have gotten a lot of love out of it. My 4th most used palette is this Franken palette from ColourPop. It's a bunch of different eyeshadow palettes put into one. So I put down August 2020 as the month and year that I bought this, but that's likely when I bought the oldest palette that is in here. I imagine some of the shades are older or younger than others. And so in December of last year, I'd only worn it 22 times, and I've actually bumped it up to 82 uses. So this is what an additional 60 uses looks like, 82 uses total. I do have pan on 2 of the shades, and I'm really close to pan on a couple other shades. I think the ring light is making it hard to see the shades, but yeah, this is definitely, over the past year, one of my most used palettes, and a big reason for that is because it's my oldest, and I just want to focus on it before it gets to be too old to put on my eyes anymore. Essentially right now what I'm doing is I'm focusing on this and the Juicy Olive palette. I'm wearing a lot of shades from both of those palettes on my lids today, including another palette that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But yeah, it's a good travel palette. I don't travel with it that much anymore because there are pans in the shades, and that makes me feel like they're more likely to break if I travel with them. But it's been good. I love this palette. Next up, my 3rd most used palette. And this is what I'm talking about when I say sometimes my projects dictate how many times I reach for something. And that's the Limoncello palette from ColourPop. I love the packaging. I have such like a nostalgic connection to this. I love it so much. It's beautiful. Even though the color story does tend to run warmer than I typically go, it is my third most used palette because I was trying to hit pan on this top shade here, Tuscan Fun. And even though the pans themselves are relatively thin, this took forever to hit pan on. In my first update ever with this, in August of 2022, I'd worn it 32 times, bumped that up to 68 times the next year, bumped it up again to 84 times the year after that, and now I have reached for it an additional 3 times to get 87 uses total, with I think the majority of the uses just being on this one shade here. It's a beautiful color story. It is one of the warmer color stories that I have in my collection, and that's probably why I don't reach for it that much anymore. I do like this touring shade here, and this yellow here is really beautiful in the inner corner. Yeah, I think because I love the packaging so much, I think when I eventually have to retire this, like when it's fully expired, I think I'm gonna have the most trouble with this one. Maybe I can repurpose the packaging in some way. My second most used palette is this one from Sydney Grace. It's the Enduring Love palette. I think the reason why I used this eyeshadow palette so much is because there was a period of time where I had a lot of red in my hair, and I used this pink matte here, Darcy, to tint my eyebrows to match my hair better. And I used that a lot. And even though I used it so much, there's only the teeniest little dent in that shade. I don't even know if the camera will pick that up. But this is what 88 uses looks like. I got this in November of 2020, so it's one of my older palettes. And I would say my most used shade after that Darcy shade is this one right here, Devotion. It's just a really beautiful, like rose gold shimmer. In 2022, I reached for it 20 times. And then I think that was around the time that my hair was red, because in the next year I bumped that up to 69 uses. So an additional 49 wears. Bumped that up again to 83 uses the next year. And in the last year, I've only worn it 5 times. These shades are also enormous. I can't imagine I would ever enjoy trying to hit pan on any of the shades from this palette, but I do like the colors. I like these jewel tones. I really, really love this John shade here. It's a silvery gold with a hint of green. Beautiful. And my final palette, my most used palette, which even I was surprised that this was my most used palette, is this quad from LH Cosmetics. It's the Shimmer Saga. I just talked about this in my products I have a pan on video because I have pan in 3 out of the 4 shades, and I'm wearing that 4th shade, Love, on my lid today. I have worn this so much in the last year just because I hit pan on one of the shades and I was like, I guess I can just move on to another topper shade, and I just kept hitting pan and moving on to the next one. So it was sort of organic, but also I was just very motivated to put this on top of the majority of the looks that I was creating because they're so sparkly and multifaceted. They just make a really beautiful topper on essentially any look that I put together, unless I'm going for a specifically matte or like super natural looking eye look. And so I got this in May of 2023. It's one of my newer palettes, and in 2023 I wore it 18 times. The next year I bumped that up to 36 times, and then I wore it in the last year, I had to do the math real quick, an additional 66 times. I've worn this 102 times total, and that means it is my most used palette in my collection currently. I recently decluttered my Too Faced Natural Nudes palette. That one I had worn like over 250 times. So if that were still in my collection, it would be my most used palette. But yeah, that is my eyeshadow breakdown. Did those answers seem to make sense to you, or were you surprised? I recently did a video where I swatched all of my eyeshadows by color category on pieces of white paper so that I could better have a catalog of what I'm working with. So if you'd like to see that, I will link that in the cards. But in the meantime, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video.